Good morning, Dr. Lawson. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce everyone who's watching this video to Dr. Holly Lawson, who works at Portland State University in the College of Education. She's going to bring a unique perspective to all these videos today. And I'm very grateful for her participation.
Well, thank you for having me. And as you said, one of my roles in my position is to provide faculty advisement to my candidates. And I coordinate a very small program in the College of Education. It's called the Visually Impaired Learner Program. And so this program is designed to prepare pre-service teachers of students with vision impairment. And the program serves the Pacific Northwest, Hawaii, and Alaska. So it's a multi-state consortium. And I have candidates across, a good portion of the U.S. And in addition to the advising, I'm what's called the cohort leader. I, of course, am involved in research, teaching, and service. So the advisement piece is really one part of my job. It's a very important role. And another thing that I'll add is that the program is mostly online. So part of the rationale for using a variety of different technologies is because I see my candidates for just a short period of time. So I really leverage the use of technology to provide advising supports. And, in having previewed some of the videos that you've already generated, one thing that stands out is that a lot of folks are using their existing learning management systems or using some type of learning management system to offer some kind of orientation module. And that's certainly something that I do. Generally, when I think about advising, though, I think about it from the very beginning of the candidate as a prospective student. So early on, before they're even admitted into our program, PSU is really fortunate. Our College of Education has recruitment staff who are really integral in helping identify candidates, getting the word out, and then even part of what we do regularly throughout the year as we're recruiting for candidates is we host webinars just like this, because again, we're trying to cast the net wide. The thing about vision impairment is that it's what's called a low incidence disability. So there's not a lot of school age children who have vision impairment. So we're trying to reach those people who have this special interest in working with this population. So we tend to attract a lot of candidates who have already worked in the field to some extent. So there's many who work as a paraeducator in a school with a student who's blind, or it may be a family member who has a child with a vision impairment. But our recruitment staff really helps give them some preliminary advisement in terms of the different programs that we offer, the fact that it's a 2-year part-time program. They give them information about financial aid. So by the time I give them information in terms of this orientation module, they're about to start their classes. So it's before they actually take any classes. And if you'd like, I can start to show you our D2L shell
Please do.
that we use. So actually, this is the orientation module, and it has, but I'd say that my focus with this really is kind of twofold. I want them to become familiar with some of the technologies that PSU does use. So PSU is a Google campus, so they get familiar with Google if they haven't already. I also want them to learn information about our program, and then it's also a means for students to get to know one another, because as I said, it is mostly online. So one of the things that I have them do is create their own little introductory video where they get to meet one another. And so within this module, there's just general content about the program and about our College of Education. And there's also information about the different program faculty. So just on this page, this is not inclusive of all of the faculty in the visually impaired learner program, but this has myself and my colleague who coordinates a sister program in orientation mobility. And then I wanted them to at least kind of get to know a little bit about their course instructors for this summer. They're taking 4 classes, most of my candidates, in their first summer. And so I just have a little picture of each of my instructors. You know, typically universities don't highlight the adjunct faculty, but like a lot of universities, we have adjunct faculty teaching classes, and I've got some really amazing instructors. And then I also want them to know who the field placement specialist is, and I have a student worker who helps with kind of detail-oriented things like shipment of Perkins Braillers. These are Braille writing devices. And so it's a little bit about who the variety of people are that support them, some different information about academic policies and procedures, an introduction to some of the technology that we use. I also try to give them some tips and pointers on how to be successful with online learning. One thing about my candidates is because of it being a graduate level program, I do have students across the age range. So I've got students in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 50s. Some of those who are, older may not have as much expertise using some of the current LMS systems. Some of my 20-year-olds as well. But I kind of give them some tips and really just give them information about the fact that, with online instruction, so much of it is self-paced, and how do you manage your time? And then,
One quick question, Holly. I mean, this is very robust. I was wondering, did you create all these modules yourself, or did you work with other folks within
that's a great question. So I did work with some colleagues who created a similar module for their programs, and then I modified it to meet the information that is relevant for my students. So I did also connect with our recruitment unit to make sure that I had everything, in there correctly. And so, yeah, a lot of it was built by me, and then each new cohort, the information needs to be adapted or modified a little bit. There's a new librarian that we've had more recently, just little things like that. It's mainly upkeep at this point, but for example, under the program advising, I have information about the different programs of study that just links to a Google Drive folder that has the sample programs of study that they can take. On our main program website, there's kind of generic information, but I want them to kind of look at another thing that's unique about this graduate program is that it does, there's a few different options, because I have some candidates who are already teachers, and so they don't need a new or initial teaching license. And I have others who have already been working in the field of special education and just want to get what's referred to typically as an endorsement. But then I have candidates who are completely new to the field of teaching. So just in this folder alone, you can see that there are quite a few different iterations of different programs of study, but it gives them at least a sampling of different options. And then from this point, so the orientation module is released a few months before they start their first class, and they usually start in the summer. So they started this summer, my new cohort. So they were able to preview information in May, and then classes started June 22nd. And this just gives them some sense of what to expect. And then while they've been taking classes this summer, I've meeting with them for individual sessions. And that's when I usually start with one of these plans of study, kind of copy it. And then I have a separate Google Drive folder that has their name on it and any specific notes. And then this is kind of ends up being their individual plan of study. But it just opens up. I have a lot of Google Docs and a lot of templates that I start with, and then I go and adapt them for each student. And so not only are there students coming in who are pursuing slightly different programs of study, because it's a teacher preparation program, I also have to advise them in terms of what are the requirements within their states. So some students, and I can see that there's already another student in this file right now. So somebody's looking at this particular file, which is great. I'm not sure who that is, but essentially, after I've individualized it for each student, then it's kind of a working document that we use to kind of keep notes on.
That's great.
Yeah, so again, you can kind of just look at the table of contents in here and get a sense of what's in that orientation module. So after the orientation module, and I will say another part of this advising is my philosophy is I want to connect with my candidates, because again, my role is really making sure they know which classes they're taking. As an instructor, not only do I want them to know which classes they're taking, but I want them to think about how those courses fit into their professional practice and professional standards. So as a very basic, I always send out information about which courses are going to take before the beginning of the term. I'm in the process of creating a new Google Doc for the fall term with a series of announcements. But every term, I either have individual sessions or group advising. So it's a part-time 2-year program, and we meet regularly to have advising. And then of course, if students need any support in between, I'm available, via email or other means. So that's the orientation module.
Great.
I can talk to you a little bit about another tool that I use, and you preface this by why do I use different tools. I mentioned one reason is because it's an online program. Another reason is because these are tools that our campus uses. And then in terms of PebblePad, the reason why I use PebblePad is because it's very customizable, and it's something that students can share with other individuals who are outside of PSU. And that gives them a little flexibility if they wanted to share a resource in their PebblePad workbook with, say, another classmate or colleague. They have the choice to do that. And there's other instances that I like to use PebblePad specifically during their practicum and student teaching that D2L doesn't afford. I like to think of PebblePad as me being able to create sort of a 3-ring binder with different tabs that are individualized for each student, but then can also be shared with those individuals who are working with the candidate. So in the case of this PebblePad advising workbook, which is what I created for the VIL program, I share it with my candidates, but in terms of another resource that they have, which is their practicum and student teaching workbooks, that's shared with me, but also their cooperating professionals outside at their school sites. So they get to see PebblePad in a few different contexts. And when I created this, I did consult with some instructional design staff, as well as a faculty member at PSU, but also a representative from Pebble Pad
Mm-hmm.
to kind of do a little wireframe of what I wanted this to look like and what I
Right.
wanted it to do. Um, an emphasis with the use of this workbook is that students direct their own advising as well. And it's really kind of a central storage space for them to put all of their advising documentation. So in this first tab, I just have them kind of just reiterate what their planned program of study is. There's the option of, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as I mentioned before, endorsement or initial licensure. We have our sister program. And then I am asking them to upload the document that I just kind of shared, the one that would be individualized for them here under their program of study, to add this link. And then some of how I've generated this is based on making mistakes or learning the hard way,
Sure.
where uh, so I've had a couple of candidates who had a teaching license, but then during their program of study, one student, it expired during the middle of the program or near the end of the program. And so there was a point at which this individual thought they might have to go back and get another initial licensure. And anyway, I just ask candidates to go ahead and include any current licensure or certification that they already have, so that I can also remind them if it expires that they make sure it doesn't expire before the end of the
Mm-hmm.
program, or before. Some of our candidates are provisionally licensed, meaning that they get hired to do the job before they're fully trained. So I asked them to put that in there as well, because that's really critical, that their employer has hired them with an agreement that they're going to complete their program of study within a certain time frame. And it's really, there's just a variety of different documents depending on what their program of study is.
What I like
And
about this really is it's great, because what you've done is that you've identified critical documents that you want them to put within their workbook. And the workbook really is just a way of organizing those documents and gaining reflections and helping them begin to see the importance of keeping these documents organized. And as you said, they can share these then with people with whom they want by being able to tailor this to different audiences.
right. And the other thing about Pebble Pad is that they have access to Pebble Pad after they graduate too. So that's a key feature of this platform. So, you know, I won't go through everything, but one other key element that I think is really important are just what I call these checkpoints.
Mm-hmm.
These are different tasks that they complete at different, you know, points within their
Right.
program. So I've got some post-admission checkpoints, some, you know, during their program checkpoints, and then I have some graduation and
Nice.
licensure checkpoints.
Nice.
And so they can kind of go through this, and I, you know, make a, you know, caveat. This is not all inclusive, but these are some of the major milestones that I want to make sure you're kind of keeping track of. So when we do have our group advising sessions, I'll kind of ask them to go through the checklist and, you know, make sure that they've looked at that information. And I'll,
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say too that, you know, if you look across the tabs,
Mm-hmm.
in some ways the checkpoints goes from, you know, post admissions through graduation and licensure, but across the tabs you'll kind of see this trajectory too of like there's a lot of information of within the program, which would be the field placement, licensure, and certification. But I also wanted to give them information about like how do you land a job after your program of study, which most of my candidates are already taken. They're already snatched up before they finish the program, because there's a severe shortage of teachers of the visually impaired across the country. But I still want to offer them something in case they need that kind of information.
That's super. You know, what I really like about this and the way you have this designed is that if you step back from this and say, well, what sometimes occurs when you're advising with graduate students is that, you know, who's keeping track of all the paperwork? Is it in the office downstairs? Is the faculty member doing it? Is the graduate student keeping it up to date? How is it organized? Because they may have it, but they don't have it readily available. And so this keeps it all there and can be
Yeah,
shared.
it does. I'd say the only thing it doesn't include would be, you know, one of the things while I was in the process of developing this was I met with our what's called Office of Academic Innovation. This is the unit that
Mm-hmm.
provides faculty support around different software platforms. I asked if there was a university-wide tool that's used for advising, and some universities do have that. And PSU is in the process. I believe they may have already adopted a tool at the undergraduate level, but not at the graduate level.
Great.
And so at the time when I met with the staff there, based on what I wanted to have and how customizable I needed it to be, it just turned out that PebblePad was the best solution for me. But it doesn't interface with things like financial aid office. I'd say that's the one, or it doesn't necessarily sync with the BandWeb, which is our course registration system. So there's a few downsides to this, but I prompt them to put the documents that I feel like are important for me to see, and then I remind them about other things that are not within my purview. You know, I don't have access to their financial records, but there are questions that they ask me, and so then I say, well, go talk to the financial aid office, and if I need to, I interface at times with the people in the financial aid office. But
Okay, that's a very good point. How does it interact well with in terms of your learning management system?
There are ways to generate assignments and then have the grades interface with D2L. I don't really use it in that way. At most, what I do is I can link from D2L to PebblePad, so I have a little widget in my courses where they can just kind of click on the widget in D2L, and then they can access PebblePad pretty readily, specifically in my field placement related courses, because that's a tool that they use with their cooperating professionals. So the D2L is really the space where there's content related to their field experience, but then their reflections about their teaching, their communications about what's happening at their sites is through PebblePad and through that 3-ring binder, their lesson plans and all of that.
What else can you show us? This is very nice.
Well, I just wanted to show you, I won't go through all the tabs, but I did want to show you this pull down menu that essentially has a template. So I mentioned that at a very minimum, I meet with candidates once a term, either individually or with group advising. And so before the advising session, I'll email them and I'll ask them to go ahead and fill out their meeting log. So this is where I'm asking them to take more of an active role in the advisement. And so it's a template that they fill out, but there's some guiding questions here to just kind of help them prepare for the meeting. So, you know, I asked them to review their plan of study and see if they're on track, review any upcoming registration dates and confirm courses for the coming terms. You know, I want them to let me know what the goals are for this meeting. How can I support them? Do they have any particular concerns? And so it's just kind of an open form field that they can fill out. A few other questions here, you know, I don't really grade them on this, but I do look back at it to see what they've included. And I always tell them that, you know, this only works as well as we both implement it. So, you know, I will go back and I'll say, you know, can you make sure you go ahead and add that information? So I guess another component to this is I have a lot of candidates who are kind of on the go, and I'll say, well, when we have our meeting, I would like you to be at a computer just so that you can take notes. And I may invite someone else, like our licensure specialist, for a meeting. So that would be where they could include other individuals who might be part of the meeting, what their meeting notes were, any outcomes, if there's any actionable items. It's kind of a long template. I tell them that they don't have to fill everything out, but it kind of gives them prompts on different things that they might need to refer to in terms of certain resources, if there's any final thoughts or reflections that they've made, how are they, I kind of like to see how they're feeling even after the session, because,
Right.
you know, they might be feeling overwhelmed. So maybe I'll go in and I'll check in with them later. But this is intended to be filled out a little bit before we meet, and then when we meet, they're filling it out as we go. So they have kind of this running log of all of our meeting notes during their program.
That is super. Now, can this be downloaded and put into a CVS type of file and uploaded then into another type of advising note system? Has anyone asked that?
You can download them as like a PDF pretty
Okay.
easily. Right now, I don't have it set up where I could set it up so that, yes, there are lots of ways to set up, like metrics or download it. I'd have to create it as an assignment. Maybe that's something I'll do. Usually what I do is I just kind of go in and look at it for each individual student before I meet with them. I don't have a lot of students. I've got right now about 20 students in my group. So I'm not advising hundreds of students like undergraduate advisors are doing. One of the other things that's unique about our program is that at times we have different scholarships for grants. And so I have information in here pertaining to that, but I also have resources that they can access pertaining to scholarships that they may be able to pursue while they're in their program of study. I just have a little template here related to their field placements, and then some other information about licensure and certification, and then employment. And, again, as they go through their program of study, we might kind of focus more on this page because they're near the end of the program. Like, the idea is it kind of goes chronologically.
Right.
And then, again, by the time that they're ready for employment, they've got some resources here. There's like a little template sample resume of a teacher of the visually impaired for when they get ready for that interview, some standard interview questions for professionals in this field. So I've just kind of got it linked to a few different materials here that they can check out.
This is excellent. Thank you. Yes. This is really quite fascinating. I love the way that you've put together really an advising curriculum here. And you've, from these menu structures that you have, and pulling down, showing the components of that and what you're actually trying to help your students with and getting some of the interaction. So it's really very well designed, very easy to use.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little nervous about it the first time I used it, but I think that most students do appreciate it. And, again, it's just a matter of encouraging and maintaining the use of it. And I guess the last main technology tool that I use, because as I mentioned, PSU is a Google campus, I use Google Sites to share static information about the program. And the reason why I use Google Sites is because I can share the information in a Google site with anyone. So because of our multi-state consortium module, I allow access to this, really back, not a front-facing website, but more of a student-centered website. I also share that with our state liaisons and other stakeholders in case they're interested. But really, this is where I house information about, again, some of the program of study, field placement information, different people. There's a list of the students in our program. Some of this information is a little redundant from the orientation module, but because they only get that really before they take their first class, I kind of want to, sometimes I'm okay with having some redundancy, especially when I feel like it's really important around our vision and mission or some of the critical concepts in special education. Kind of going back to the technology on this Google site, I do have some help for students in terms of accessing all of our different technology tools as well. And this was linked from the D2L orientation module, this particular page. So in order, like, even though there's some redundancy of some content, when applicable and when it makes sense, I kind of linked to this site because, again, this is something that I want them to go and look at throughout their program of study. And one of the things that I did is I have surveyed my students, asking them which tools they use. Like, do they use their PebblePad workbook? Do they use the Google site? There's been positive feedback across both the Google and the PebblePad. So anyway, there's information about how the tech, or what the technologies do, or what the purpose of them is, but then also links to kind of some tutorials. So
Great.
anyway, it kind of actually has a lot, you know, like even printing, and we added more information about Zoom conferencing because we are relying on Zoom a lot more. And then, you know, we also have a little bit of information about PebblePad here as well. So that's one nice thing. And then even just under the program of study, I believe I'm looking for, under course info, one of the questions I get a lot from candidates is like, well, what's involved in this particular class? Like, they really want to start to prepare. So I have all of our course syllabi in this table that link. So, you know, sometimes I'll get that question and I'll just say, well, hey, go look at the VIL and O&M Info Central and you can find the course syllabi, the most recent course syllabus that when that class was offered. And so they can do that. And then I also have the same for textbooks so that they can prepare for the textbooks for each of the classes as well. And, you know, I still send it out every term, but it's one of those things that, you know, I have here as a kind of just repository of wealth of information. You know, I will also post job openings. I get a lot of information about job openings. We have a Facebook page, and so anytime that there are announcements, it kind of just populates onto, you know, this page. A lot of times this was an announcement about a candidate who just recently passed a national certification exam in orientation mobility. So, you know, they can kind of see this feed. I encourage them to go ahead and, you know, like the Facebook page so that they can get that information. But some of it is, there might be some program announcements. A lot of times it's kind of just more celebratory information too.
This is nice, builds community.
Yeah. And then also I have Google, this is from my 2018 group, actually. I have Google Lists, or groups, which is a listserv. And so any of the messages that I send out also pre-populate here. I need to update this for my newer cohort. And so, yeah, there's a lot of information.
Yes, there is.
I try to scaffold their learning around the different technologies. So that's why in that orientation module, in D2L, they do a little quiz. You know, they read information about the summer classes and they take a little quiz. They engage in a discussion board where they post a video of themselves. They do a few things that are D2L related. And then in the summer, in one of their classes, before they access their advising workbook, I have them do what's called a cultural autobiography in PebblePad, just so that they log in the first time. I'm on a Zoom session. I talk to them about it. I talk to them about how PebblePad is different from D2L. And then they spend time filling out, you know, some prompts related to their own cultural background and how that influences their teaching. And then they dig deeper once they do the, you know, access their PebblePad advising workbook and get into their practicum coursework. So anyway, and I guess the very last thing, that's kind of my very favorite new tool to use. So I created a Google chat group for my cohort, and I also created Google chat for different classes. What I love about this now that I'm working from home so much is that I will not mistakenly text message my students something. I don't give them my cell phone number anymore. I used to give
Right.
them my cell phone number. I would in the case of an emergency, but I say just contact me through Google Chat because it works on my smartphone, but you can also open it up as a web browser, which you see here.
Hmm.
And this was just a message that I sent out as an email with the using my group Google, list, but I also kind of wanted to use it via Google Chat. And I said, there's a delay in getting books through this particular publisher. So they've been really awesome and established this new policy that once you order your hard copy textbook, you'll automatically get an e-text to ensure that you have your text before classes start. And so I just posted that. That was just a few days ago. And, I kind of regularly post little announcements in Google Chat
Hmm.
too, but there's also that opportunity for like that one-way communication as well. And I find that I'm a lot more responsive to those little tiny questions. Like I just got one earlier today about can you remind me which class I need to register for?
Hmm.
And just pop it in there really quickly, and here you go.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, looking at this, you have integrated these technologies so well. What would you say to another faculty member who is looking at this and is not as comfortable using the technologies at this point? How did you get started? How did you overcome the um, first learning curve, if you wish, of using this?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate in that I had used other LMS systems at the university level. PebblePad was a pretty huge learning curve.
Mhm.
I would say, contact your um, instructional designers, the staff at your university who provides support to faculty. And, every university has slightly different, resources available. But I think one of the silver linings with COVID-19 is because so many universities are going online or offering remote instruction, most universities have also ramped up their supports around
Mhm.
using different technologies. So I think starting out by reaching out to other people, and I know in my case, I didn't know how to use a lot of the technology myself. So it was a matter of either finding other communities of practice that know how to use these tools, and both D2L, all of them have some way to access and ask questions to other people, whether that be in PebblePad, there's kind of this community website.
Mhm.
Same thing for D2L, there's the Brightspace community page. And so sometimes I just post a question. If I can't find it, I'll just post it there, and I very often will get an answer. Um, and then also, I am fortunate that I have other colleagues to look to. So because there's other programs that are similar in the Graduate School of Education that are sort of small niche programs, I was able to get some ideas from some of my colleagues. And I've offered to say, hey, if you want to just copy what I've done and then make it your own, you can do that. And that's what I did with the D2L orientation module. I took what was
Mhm.
already existing in another program and what some of the staff in our recruitment office had done, and just kind of did a slight variation on that. So those would be some recommendations I have that I think can be helpful.
That's wonderful. I was wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share with us, or any other reflections you have on this process that you've gone through.
I think that it's ongoing, and as I said, it's fundamentally important. It's fundamentally important to have students feel like there is someone they could reach out to whenever a question pops up or arises. So having different ways to help them get that information is important. And when it is online, it is different in terms of how they might be, the time that they might have to search for that information. Or again, they may be in their car and they just need to ask me a quick question. So that's where the Google Chat just is wonderful. Um, and I would say that, I mentioned already some of the constraints or challenges within
Mhm.
PSU, which, every university has some. I think where I'm really wanting to go in the next direction, though, is um, looking at our alumni, because it's a whole cycle, right?
Hmm.
So I do have an alumni Google group for those who've graduated, but we also know through research that a lot of the professionals in the field are the ones who also recruit for our programs.
Right.
And so kind of maintaining connections, I would like to find more ways to build that in. You know, I will send messages from time to time to my alumni, but I think that's kind of my next step. Um, and yeah, that would be my other goal for myself in terms of the advisement piece,
That's
because I
wonderful.
don't like feeling like once they're done, I still kind of want to know that they're working as a
Hmm.
teacher of the visually impaired, and even for the grants that they receive, that's important. But I want to keep tabs because, you know, they will be cooperating professionals, they will be mentor teachers, and it's that continuation of building this larger community of practice.
Well, what you've shown us here today is just absolutely amazing, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do so this morning. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, I think that's it.
Well, Holly, thank you very much. Dr. Lawson, this is incredible. I'm sure that you're going to inspire a number of people to look at this and really reflect on their own practice, and you've given them many ideas to move forward on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you producing all the videos so that we have this shared space to talk about um, advising too.
It's my pleasure, and I'm sure that folks will be looking into contacting you.